This Manual Plus item is designed to supplement the WGI Adjudication Manual and Rulebook for intended use by WGI judges, WGI's circuit partners, and their judge associations. It's a common mistake for younger local judges to see themselves merely as audience proxies, with their job being to interpret and deliver a rating and ranking through the passive reactionary eyes of the audience. In contrast, we know that the actual perspective of a judge is that of the informed observer, with the expectation of a knowledge base that goes beyond that of the typical audience member. Our judges are asked to look below the surface and to dig deeper. In order to do this, judges have a heightened awareness. Let's warm up that awareness.
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make?
Go!
The answer is 13. But did you see the moonwalking bear?
Go!
With groups applying more varied methods of presenting ideas, we have to look beyond the obvious and dig deeper to find the bear. Let's work to assume that there's usually something more to consider than what is initially found on the surface. In the summer meetings, the instructor community stated it a bit more poetically. Before we award the first to cross the finish line, it's important to understand exactly what race was run. Exceptional achievement is born from exceptional challenge. Today, we'll look from an analysis perspective to better understand the depth of challenges presented by different settings, formats, and situational expectations, and thereby understand different degrees of achievement by acknowledging these more challenging and more forgiving environments. We're used to considering individuals in a group working together as a team towards a common goal. The individuals have an understanding of their role as well as a working knowledge of the roles of the others in the group and how these roles relate within the group. This is our archetypical approach to ensemble control, one of the meters for achievement, all working as one towards the common end. Consider for a moment that you're the foreman of this project and your goal is to raise this one wall to an upright position using this pole method. If you were to call 20 of your strongest friends, would you be able to push the wall up in one day's work, let's say 8 hours? Generally, think of what you would need to do in the morning to be able to raise the wall in the afternoon. Given the 8 hours, would you need to meet your group beforehand? Now imagine that you've been given only an hour to raise the wall. Assuming you're like me and would demand that your friends all meet the night before, what are the types of things you might talk about or do before showing up at the work site in the morning? Think how the restriction or discipline of time shifts your process. When the goal of the group demands a more refined approach, we see the need for the application of a single prescribed method or technique and a heightened awareness of time in order for the individuals and group to achieve this type of goal. Restrictive time environments call for us to consider process a bit more. Rowing is another example of a group of individuals working towards a common goal using similar or even the same effort from person to person. The need for a singular technique and a singular sense of time is needed as the ultimate goal hinges on these constraints of time. Ask yourself, if the goal was to simply finish the race, how important would training, timing, and technique be? It's the need to finish first, or finish faster, or to work more efficiently that calls for the greater effort and understanding by the individuals in the group. Remember, this is still a group of individuals working towards a single goal in similar or the same efforts. Now let's take a look at the efforts of individuals. Focus on the fielder catching the ball.
Swing, and he pulls the fastball that time high in the air toward fairly deep right center. Cruz is there to make the catch, and it's a one-pitch out.
Let's do something that we encourage the IA judges to do. Let's project ourselves into the physicality of the player catching the ball. What is your primary responsibility? Once the ball is hit, what are some of the considerations for the player before he catches the ball? Spot the ball, project the ball's pathway, determine the arrival point and time, position yourself for a successful catch, and determine the catch technique for this pop fly situation.
Swing, and he pulls the fastball that time high in the air toward fairly deep right center. Cruz is there to make the catch, and it's a one-pitch out.
You can see through the player's movement some of the aspects of this process. Let's take one last look at this and see if you can identify where the player feels he has set himself up for success.
Swing, and he pulls the fastball that time high in the air toward fairly deep right center. Cruz is there.
You should have seen the assessment, the reassessment, and the adjustment. Now let's consider the same task with the player's added responsibility of kinesthetic awareness. This is the awareness of people and the architecture of the setting. We typically see this when we see the exploration of weight sharing, phrase sharing, and proximity.
He's gotten his pitches up. He hasn't gotten away with it so far today. Ball hit down the right field line. Cruz in the corner.
When comparing this catch to the first one, we see that the primary requirement was met in both. The ball was caught. However, when we isolate the process, in addition to the previous considerations, the ball was actually caught farther from the original standing position of the player. And the player also had to consider the foul line and the wall in making the play. Let's watch again.
His pitch is up. He hasn't gotten away with it so far today. Ball hit down the right field line. Cruz in the corner.
Let's do a quick comparison. Remind yourself of the very first pop fly. When comparing the two catches, the primary goal was met in both. The ball was caught. But in one, you had the added responsibility of having to move throughout the assessment because the ball was farther. You also had in one the navigation of the setting and potentially the people in the stands. These factors would be considered added or simultaneous responsibilities. Now, when thinking of the two catches, compare the opportunity to adjust or the player's ability to recover. Which of the catches offered more opportunity for recovery? Why? Though both players were assigned with the same task, one of these settings was more challenging and one was more forgiving. Which one is which? Let's see them together.
Swing, and he pulls the fastball that time high in the air toward fairly deep right center. Cruz is there to make the...
Now here's an extreme example of the amount of information processed as well as kinesthetic awareness as a simultaneous responsibility.
Johnson, his first year at AAA, from the set he deals. That swung on and driven deep down the left field line toward the corner, and this ball is going to be... Oh, it's caught! It's not...
Let me start by telling you this is completely computer generated, but let's suspend our disbelief just for the purposes of analysis. The first thing to note in this manufactured situation is that this is actually the ball girl, which is a great introduction to class standards and expectations of certain classes, but that's not the purpose of this video. So for now, let's work on the assumption that she is a paid team member, and that catching the ball is still her primary objective and a reasonable expectation based on the situation. When comparing this catch to the other two, we're looking at the same primary goal, which is to catch the ball, and a very similar timeline through this pop fly. Account first for the amount of information being processed in real time. Next, think of her familiarity of her surroundings and the constraints or opportunities provided by this kinesthetic awareness. Now consider the absence of time to actually make an adjustment or to explore different options other than the one she initially chose. When we project ourselves into the physicality of the player, imagine at what point do you actually create the plan and decide to implement it.
He can't believe it. Let's look at that replay. Oh my, what an amazing play.
And now for our last baseball example. The primary objective is still the same. The minimum process by which to achieve this objective is still the same. Make sure to project yourself into the physicality of the player that catches the ball. In doing so, you'll see what makes this an exceptional challenge and perhaps an exceptional achievement.
Walks, but again, able to work around it for the most part. 3 walks, 2 hit batsmen and 3 hits. Oh, look at that line drive to the mound. The pitcher caught it, and is he okay? Yep. Daniel Norris, he just laid there on the front of the...
So he met the primary objective, he caught the ball. He also had to process the same information in order to make that catch as, say, the first couple of pitches. So on the surface, if we're just accounting for skills, we have 2 of the same skills. But once we dig deeper, we have to acknowledge that there is an aspect of this particular catch that makes this exceptional. What do you think it is? You hopefully brought up the diminished or non-existent recovery time, and that gets us into reaction time. These are both important factors when it comes to risk, which is part of a later conversation. We would also hope that you would notice the calling on the internalized technique. This is not necessarily something you practice for. Acknowledging the exceptional demands on this player are all part of our acknowledging the constraints of time. Where our first 3 catches that we studied took over 5 seconds, this particular catch happened only 3/10 of a second after the ball was hit. As we consider the diminished amount of time between the ball being hit and caught, we have to ask ourselves if the information needed to achieve was also diminished. Was the expectation of the objective itself diminished in any way because of this compressed timeline? We can certainly agree that the player had a greater investment in the successful outcome. Now this may seem obvious, but let's go ahead and turn the stone anyway. When you compare this to the other catches, do you find this situation more challenging or more forgiving? If you're splitting this video between 2 sessions, this is your best pause point. Let's look at some planned or rehearsed events. Let's start by projecting ourselves into the physicality of the performer. In this instance, what is the performer's primary objective? In the baseball examples, it was the outcome, catch the ball. In this case, the outcome is pretty much an inevitability. You will hit the water, and you'll do so at 32 feet per second per second. Some might argue that the minimal splash is actually the objective. It's important to remember that the full challenge of the dive is no more determined by the splash than the full challenge of a rifle toss is determined by the catch. Excuse the pun, but on the surface, the splash and the catch are both layman's windows into judgment. You see this with the audience and audience proxy judges. But the informed observer will dig deeper and realize that these are only the finishing components of these skills or objectives. Diving is actually closer to what we do in the sense that the primary objective is to display exceptional ability while meeting an established standard for excellence. Let's watch the dive again and make sure to project yourself into the physicality of the diver. The dive itself will take about 1.5 seconds. So imagine the amount of information and the training needed to execute the inward 3.5 somersault in that compressed timeline. As you watch, I also want you to project yourself into the preparation, the emotional and mental state as you approach the edge of the board, and the concentration as you establish the prep and the departure. Through that projection, you should now start getting a sense of importance of the prep and the initiation. Let's look at that same skill, the inward 3.5 somersault, but set in a different format. Now, imagine for a moment that you're the coach of the first diver, and you're approached by the coach of the pairs. One of the pairs has fallen ill, and that coach wants your diver to fill in as the second in the pair. He just saw your diver achieve this inward 3.5, so we know he can do the skill. We've seen all 3 divers complete the skill. Is there any reason to believe that your single diver might not be able to step in for that missing partner? To help us find the answer, let's join our little melodrama called Moving Day by the Low Budget Players. Hey Barbara, can you carry that box to the truck? Sure. Lift. Walk. Place. Hey Bob and Joe, can you guys carry that box to the truck? Sure. Ready to lift? 1, 2, 3. Okay. Hey, slow down. I'm walking backwards and I can't see. Let's try turning to the side. Okay, let's set it down. 1, 2, 3. You heard Bob and Joe agree on the timing used to pick up the box. You also heard them negotiate and agree on the method and speed used to carry the box to the truck. And then we heard them agree on the timing for placing the box in the truck. Barb, on the other hand, was unencumbered by these added responsibilities and could change method, reinitiate, or even self-edit during any part of the process. It's these agreements in timing and method that make this difference. The common understanding of a singular exacting sense of time creates the more challenging situation. The direct comparison from start to finish and the exposure to error makes this format less forgiving. Let's pose the question, is it possible to display this singular exacting sense of time and space in a non-unison format? To see this, let's look and identify coordinated effort, the tolerances inherent to the situations, the interdependence or the heightened kinesthetic awareness of those involved, and the availability of adjustment or recovery. These are ultimately the same things we look at in unison settings. Let's work our way up to these examples and calibrate our awareness along the way. Here we see separate but coordinated efforts of 2 people working towards a single objective, to clean the room. They've separated the responsibilities so that the work can be done faster. In doing so, they're also working more independently. Their individual pace does not depend directly on the other person's performance. The timeline for the task is more eventual than immediate, and the tolerance for variables is high. Now in this example, you see a coordinated effort of 4 people working towards a single goal, and that's to press the shirts. Again, each with their own separate individual responsibility. The process is a bit more systematic with an interrelationship of jobs. Once a shirt has gone through the initial step, it's passed on to the next person, and then the next until the task is finished. Shirts are then added into the process in increments of time that are considered of what seems to be 2 factors. First, the time the machines need to process the shirt at each station, and then the time that each performer needs to complete their assigned task. This time constraint seems to be concrete, thereby limiting the variables for each station. The application of technique is demanded in order to keep up with the pace, and the mastery of the technique and timing is what buys each worker the short breaths in between repeated tasks. When you project yourself into the physicality of these performers, it's easy to see that compared to the housekeepers, this situation is less forgiving and far more challenging. Although the range is limited, We're getting closer to that single sense of time and process, but not an exacting one. We're not seeing the precision that is demonstrated and proven in unison settings. Here we see two people in what appears to be a rehearsal setting for a race format. This means we consider the compressed timeline, reaction time, and the availability of recovery as we factor the challenge and the achievement. We see separate but hyper-coordinated efforts that test the limits of interrelationship and the kinesthetic awareness between the two performers, their equipment, and the space contained in the objective. You absolutely see the need for a single sense of timing in order for this objective to be met successfully. Let's watch it again in real time so that you can project yourself into the physicality of either one of these athletes. Next, we have an example that exploits the aspect of speed and includes a level of danger. Danger being an extreme version of risk that begs the question, what might go wrong in the case of a failure to achieve? Do you see an agreement on a single exacting sense of time? It's a coordinated effort for sure, with each performer having a separate role in the objective, each in charge of a necessary component to the team's success, and a commanding understanding of the interdependence of those roles and the kinesthetic awareness to execute those roles with precision. Each person has a slight opportunity for adjustment, but those opportunities are displaced so that the team is always in critical form. Once each individual is engaged in their component, the room for error disappears. Now for our last example, let's look at something a little closer to home. Of course, if you watch this entire program, you'll find a healthy balance of unison efforts, similar efforts displaced in time, and coordinated individual efforts. But we're focused on this section. Here you see variations of similar skills that are combined in different ways, coordinated through time and space. The interdependence is not just evident, but proven in the over-under moments. Speed is a factor, as is the fact that as one group of partners finish, they split off and set up for a second and more complex pass. It's in this transition that we see slight opportunities for individuals to take a breath and make adjustments, and for two to actually take some downtime. During the flying passes, we're forced to acknowledge the heightened kinesthetic awareness and the absence of opportunity for adjustment or recovery in the case of failure.